He thought cutting me out of Mom's will would finally put me in my place. But when the lawyer chuckled and flipped the last page, his smirk disappeared faster than his inheritance. I'm Danielle Brooks. I'm 33 years old, and last Tuesday was the most surreal day of my life. We were gathered in the heavy oak-paneled office of Mom's estate lawyer, Mr. Halpern, whose walls smelled like old money and older secrets. The windows were shuttered halfway, letting in just enough daylight to catch the swirling dust in the air, like particles of memory suspended in time. My stepbrother Mark sat 2 chairs away from me, legs man-spread like he owned the place, wearing an ill-fitting suit and that smug performative smirk he always reserved for big moments. His wife Sandra sat beside him, flipping through her phone, probably browsing home decor on Pinterest like she'd already mentally gutted Mom's living room. Mark had always been like that, greedy, dismissive, cocky in a way that only came from growing up entitled without ever having to earn it. We weren't related by blood, but you'd never know that by how possessive he was about everything with our last name on it. Especially after Mom's health started to fail. It had only been 3 weeks since the funeral. 3 weeks since I'd stood at Mom's graveside in heels that pinched and a ribbon around my wrist, holding back tears while Mark barely bothered to look somber. He gave a half-hearted eulogy that mentioned her love of home-cooked meals, more than anything about her character. That alone told me how little he really knew her. But now here we were. Her entire life, her house, savings, belongings, about to be divided like slices of cake at a party nobody wanted to attend. Mr. Halpern, Mom's longtime estate attorney, cleared his throat and shuffled a stack of cream-colored papers. He looked exactly like someone who spent his life managing the affairs of the dead. Solemn, patient, mildly disinterested. But I knew Halpern had always respected Mom. He was one of the few people who called to check in on her even after her stroke. The last will and testament of Pamela and Brooks, he began. His voice was smooth and official, like it had recited this script 1,000 times. This document is dated 4 months prior to Mrs. Brooks' passing. At the time, she was of sound mind and judgment, as confirmed by her primary care physician and a court-appointed psychiatric evaluator. I nodded slowly. I remembered that period vividly. Mom had been weaker but sharp. Sharp enough to beat me at Scrabble and still critique the evening news. She knew her time was limited. That knowledge changed her. She spoke more in parables. Less about what she wanted and more about what mattered. I never imagined that mindset would lead to something like this. Mr. Halpern continued reading the standard legal preamble. I found myself staring at the framed picture on his bookshelf. Him and Mom at some charity event a decade ago. Both smiling, both younger, unaware of the quiet storm that would one day form between their 2 families. Mark shifted in his chair, huffed a breath and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Let's speed this up, some of us have closings to schedule." I said nothing. I'd never been one for theatrics. I kept things tight, my schedule, my emotions, my expectations. Even now, as my pulse thudded in my ears, I kept my face neutral. But inside I was unraveling. I'd cared for Mom in ways Mark never had. I coordinated her prescriptions, cooked meals when her hands were too shaky, and stayed up with her through long coughing fits. After her second minor stroke, I even moved in for 3 weeks to help with physical therapy. I never expected a gold medal for any of it, but I also didn't expect what came next. To my beloved daughter Danielle, Halpern read, glancing only briefly in my direction, I leave the following, $100 as a symbolic gesture. The room went so quiet I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking behind his desk. Then laughter. Mark's sharp, grating bark echoed off the walls like a slap. $100. Well, guess you got the symbolic part right. I sat frozen. I didn't look at him. I didn't even blink. My fingers went cold. I swallowed hard, feeling the back of my throat burn. It didn't make sense. Mom and I weren't perfect, but we'd had something real. She called me every week. She trusted me with her medical directives. She made me promise more than once to keep Mark from doing something stupid with the house. And now, this? Mark leaned back in his chair, triumph spread across his face like melted butter. Guess all that nursing you did wasn't worth much after all, he said, not even bothering to whisper. Halpern wasn't fazed. To my stepson Mark, he continued, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the primary residence at 84 Brighton Lane, my investment portfolio, savings accounts and all personal belongings. Mark exhaled like he'd just gotten off a treadmill. Sandra clutched his arm, squeezing it as if she were the one inheriting it all. My ears rang. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream. Not because of the money, but because it meant Mom had seen me and somehow dismissed me. But Mr. Halpern didn't close the folder. He adjusted his glasses, pulled out a separate envelope and said, "There is, however, a final clause. One that supersedes all previously mentioned provisions. It is contingent upon a sealed letter written by the deceased, which was to be opened only under specific circumstances. Namely, should either beneficiary dispute the fairness or intention of the document." Mark sat up straighter. Wait, what? Halpern opened the letter. It was handwritten, addressed simply, "To be read by Mr. Halpern only, should Mark respond with arrogance or Danielle with silence." He paused and looked up at us. Pamela anticipated this might go poorly. Mark scoffed. "This is ridiculous." But I saw his face twitch. He knew Mom well enough to understand she wasn't someone who left things to chance. And she certainly didn't enjoy being manipulated, not in life and apparently not in death. Halpern began reading. "If you're hearing this, then my predictions were correct. Mark is probably gloating and Danielle is trying not to cry or storm out. Let me be clear. The way you just heard is a decoy. Yes. To see who showed their true colors when they thought I was no longer watching. The real will is located in a safety deposit box at Seabrook First Bank. And only one person has the key, Danielle." He looked up slowly. The silence that followed was dense. Mark's jaw dropped, his complexion draining to a ghostly white. Sandra made a choked sound, half gasp, half growl. I blinked. My purse. In the small inner pocket was a key I didn't recognize. Mom had handed it to me weeks before her final hospital trip and said only, "Hold on to this. You'll know when it matters." Mattered. Halpern leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "We'll reconvene tomorrow after I retrieve the actual will. Miss Brooks, I suggest you bring that key." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. Mark, however, stood up so fast his chair screeched. "This is some kind of joke." She was confused near the end. "You said she was of sound mind, but clearly." "She was tested by 2 independent professionals," Halpern interrupted. "And you do well not to insult her memory any further." Mark looked ready to explode. But there was nothing left to say. For once in his life he was speechless. Me. For the first time in weeks I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. Mr. Halpern unfolded the letter slowly, like he already knew it was about to cause a small earthquake in the room. His eyes scanned the page, lips twitching faintly before he read aloud. "If you're reading this, that means Mark's already opened his big mouth and Danielle has probably gone silent. Let me be clear, the will you just heard is a decoy. Yes. For both of you. If you failed it, Mr. Halpern is now holding the real instructions." Mark's face went slack. For once in his life he was completely speechless. I sat frozen, every inch of my skin tingling. "Mark," Halpern continued, "if you're hearing this, that means you couldn't help yourself. You mocked your sister. Again. You thought this was about what you deserved. You thought I wouldn't see what kind of man you'd become." The blood drained from Mark's face. Sandra shifted in her chair, suddenly a little less smug. "Danielle," Halpern said, reading Mom's words, "if you're listening quietly, I want you to know I saw everything. The midnight phone calls. The grocery runs. The doctor's visits. You gave me dignity in the last years of my life. I knew you'd never ask for anything, which is exactly why you deserve more than just symbolic gratitude." Mark's head snapped toward me. What the hell is this? But Halpern wasn't finished. He pulled out another envelope, this one thinner, official-looking, and placed it gently on the desk. "This," he said, "is the actual will. And yes, it's fully legal and binding. The first version was a ruse designed by your mother to see your true colors. She wasn't just testing you, Mark. She was watching." He slid the second envelope open and began to read. "I, Pamela N. Brooks, being of sound mind and full awareness, do hereby revoke all previous wills and declare the following as my last will and testament." Mark's knee started bouncing. Sandra had gone completely still, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the arm of her chair like it was an anchor. "To my stepson Mark, I leave a trust fund totaling $10,000, payable in monthly installments of $500 per month for the next 20 months. This amount should cover minor living expenses and give you time to figure out how to support yourself without relying on others. Mark slammed his hand on the table. You're kidding me. Halpern didn't look up. Please refrain from interruptions. To Danielle, my daughter, my caretaker, my only child who truly showed up when I needed her, I leave the full remainder of my estate. This includes the home at 84 Brighton Lane, all financial and investment accounts, personal belongings and any life insurance disbursements. Additionally, I leave you my private journals because I want you to know how proud I truly was. I felt like the floor beneath me had tilted. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare believe what I'd just heard. Mark, however, exploded. You can't be serious. That's fraud. She wasn't in her right mind, she was dying. Halpern set the letter down, expression calm. Mr. Brooks, your mother took every legal precaution. This will was witnessed, notarized and medically verified. She even had it recorded on video. I have a flash drive if you'd like to watch it. He pushed a small labeled USB stick across the desk like it was just another business card. I felt the heat of Mark's fury radiate across the room. She was manipulated, he barked. This is all Danielle's doing. I finally spoke. She gave me a key. Weeks before she passed. She told me to hold on to it, said I'd know when to use it. I thought it was sentimental. I didn't even know what it was for until today. Halpern nodded. That key unlocks her safety deposit box. Inside you'll find the original signed version of this will, plus a series of letters addressed to both of you. Mark was shaking his head. This is garbage. You're stealing everything. Sandra tried to shush him, clearly aware this tantrum wasn't helping. You're lucky she left you anything, I said quietly. Mark scoffed. $10,000? Are you serious? She didn't have to give you a dime. But she gave you a chance. Probably more than you deserved. His face twisted with rage. You think you earned this? You think just because you babysat her a few times? I moved into her house for almost 2 months, Mark, I snapped. I cooked. I cleaned. I helped her walk again. You showed up twice. One of those times was to measure the guest bedroom, in case you turned it into a gym. Silence. Even Halpern looked a little taken aback by that detail. Mark stood abruptly. We'll see about this, he growled. I'll contest it. I'll get a lawyer. You can try, Halpern replied calmly, but the court tends to side with documents this well prepared. Especially ones that include psychiatric clearance and video testimony. I'd advise you to accept your portion and move on. Sandra tugged on Mark's sleeve. Let's go, she hissed, clearly aware that the ship had not only sailed but crashed into a legal iceberg. Mark glared at me one last time before storming out. I stayed seated. I wasn't ready to stand. I needed the room to stop spinning. Halpern finally leaned back in his chair and said gently, Pamela loved you, Danielle. She spoke about you often. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of. But more importantly, she wanted to make sure you knew she saw you. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. She said you were her greatest comfort in the end, he added. Not the house. Not the money. Just your presence. I nodded slowly. I didn't do it for the inheritance, I said. I know, Halpern replied. That's exactly why you deserve it. By the time I stepped out of Mr. Halpern's office, the weight of the last hour hadn't even begun to settle. The midday sun glared down like nothing had changed, but everything had. I stood on the front steps, clutching the folder he'd given me, the new will, the USB video and the key to Mom's safety deposit box. I looked down at it. It was brass, heavy, with a little white tag tied to it in curling black script. For when the mask finally falls. Mom. I turned the tag over and felt a sudden pang, her handwriting. Sharp loops, delicate curves, just as I remembered from the notes she used to leave in my lunchbox as a kid. Don't let the mean girls dull your sparkle. Love, Mom. And now, even in death, she was still protecting me from the meanest one of all. My stepbrother. I took a cab home. I didn't trust myself to drive. My hands were still trembling. When I stepped into my apartment, it hit me all at once. The silence. The full gravity of what had happened. I'd inherited my mother's entire estate. Her house, her investments, her personal belongings. And Mark had stormed out with nothing but a shrinking trust fund and a bruised ego. And yet, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. I dropped my bag in the folder on the kitchen counter and leaned against the fridge trying to slow my thoughts. I could still hear Mark's voice. She gave you everything? Are you kidding me? But I wasn't kidding. This was real. I had to see it for myself. I opened the folder and pulled out the USB drive. My laptop whirred as I plugged it in and opened the file labeled Final. It opened to a simple video, grainy footage, taken in what looked like Halpern's office. Mom was sitting in a chair across from him, her favorite scarf looped around her neck. Her hair was thinner than I remembered, her skin pale. But her eyes, sharp, clear. Halpern's voice came through from behind the camera. Pamela, are you of sound mind today? She smiled. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. And you're aware that this testimony is to accompany your legally filed will? Yes. And I want this to be played only if Mark challenges it. Which I know he will. I laughed softly, tears already forming. He knew. Then she turned, looking directly into the camera. Danielle, she said. If you're watching this, it means I had to do something drastic to make sure you got what you deserved. I'm sorry I had to trick you, Mark. But I needed to see who he really was one last time. She paused, her hands folded in her lap. I wish I could say I was surprised. But I'm not. He's always been entitled. Always saw me as a means to an end. I tried, Danielle. I really did. But it was you who stood by me. You who never asked for anything but gave me everything. She smiled, eyes glistening. The nights you slept on the recliner next to me after the surgery. The way you handled my pills when my hands shook. You did it all quietly. I noticed. Even when I didn't say anything. I noticed. She leaned closer to the camera, voice dropping slightly. That house, that account, all of it. I leave it to you not because I think you need it but because you earned it. And because you'll honor it. You'll remember the memories inside those walls, not just see them as bricks to be sold off. I was crying now. Not just a tear or two but the kind of tears that feel like they've been waiting years for permission to fall. The video ended. Just like that. No fanfare. No cinematic fade to black. Just her, honest, loving and fiercely protective to the very end. That night I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about what to do next. What to say. Whether to call Mark. Whether I even wanted to. Because despite everything there was still a part of me, that small wounded daughter part, that wanted him to say, you deserved it. I was wrong. But I also knew better. Mark wasn't built for humility. The next morning I took the key and drove to the bank. It was surreal. The manager, a neat, balding man with horn-rimmed glasses, led me down a sterile hallway into a cold, white-walled vault. He inserted a master key while I used Mom's. The box slid out with a soft metallic click. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a velvet pouch and a manila envelope labeled simply, "Read when you're alone." I took everything home. I started with the velvet pouch. Inside was a simple gold pendant, one I hadn't seen since childhood. It used to hang around Mom's neck when she'd pick me up from school. I held it up to the light and whispered, "Hi, Mom." Then the envelope. Inside was a single letter. Danielle, if you're reading this, you know the truth now. And if you're crying, stop. You've always had a soft heart, but I need you to be strong. Mark is going to make noise. He'll try to drag you through the mud. But don't engage. You've already won. Not just the estate, the moral ground. There are 2 numbers in the back of this envelope. One is my lawyer's private line. The other is a counselor I want you to speak with, not because you're broken but because grief is complicated. Don't carry all of this alone. It was signed simply, "With all the love I never said enough. Mom." I flipped to the back and sure enough, 2 numbers written in her signature teal ink. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled, shoulders shaking. I didn't call Mark. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I did call the counselor. And I did start reading her journal. Each page was a breadcrumb back to her. Memories, thoughts, dreams she'd never shared aloud. She wrote about the day I was born, the time she almost left my dad, and how proud she was the day I got my first promotion. She even wrote about Mark, how she tried to see the good in him. How in the end she just hoped he'd find peace without needing to control others. In the final entry, dated 3 weeks before she passed, she wrote, "Danielle will be okay. I believe that now. She's stronger than she realizes. And maybe one day when the grief fades she'll sit in the garden and remember me not as the woman who left a surprise will, but just as her mom. I closed the journal and hugged it to my chest. He was wrong about one thing. I'd never forget that surprise will. But I would also never forget the truth it revealed. About Mark, about her, and about me. 3 days passed before Mark made his move. I should have known he wouldn't let it go. Not someone like him. For narcissists like Mark, losing wasn't just painful. It was inconceivable. It started with a text. "Mark, we need to talk. You know this isn't over." No greeting. No apology. Just pure Mark. I didn't respond. That afternoon he followed it up with an email. Then another. And by the next morning his wife Sandra had posted a vaguely worded rant on Facebook about certain people exploiting the dead for profit. 5. By the end of the week he was full-on spiraling. Calling mutual friends. Digging up old family drama. Telling anyone who'd listen that I'd manipulated Mom during her final months. I even heard from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Hey, is it true you changed the will behind Mark's back?" It was exhausting. But I held the line. I forwarded everything to Mr. Halpern, who assured me the revised will was airtight. Your mother anticipated resistance. She made every legal provision possible to ensure her wishes would stand. Still, Mark wasn't just attacking legally, he was going for the jugular emotionally. He sent me a voice memo. His voice low and biting. "You think this is justice? You think this is what Mom would have wanted? You weren't even there when she had her second fall. I took care of her too, Danielle. You don't get to play the grieving saint." I stared at my phone, heart pounding. It took every ounce of restraint not to scream back through the mic. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down and opened Mom's journal again. Page after page reminded me of the truth. Not the version Mark wanted to sell, but the quiet, often unseen truth of who Mom was and what she valued. She wrote, "Mark always needs a villain. It's how he keeps his story intact. But life isn't a comic book. Sometimes people are just lost." And a few entries later, Danielle keeps showing up. Even when I know she's hurting. She never asks for praise. She just brings soup and reads to me like I'm a child again. I think I love her more every day. And it terrifies me to think she might never know it. I clutched the book to my chest. I had known. In the small ways. In the soft smiles, the hand squeezes, the "thank you baby" she whispered on hard days. But still, seeing it written, it cracked something in me. The next morning I drove to Mom's house. My house, technically. It still didn't feel real. The front door stuck slightly, just like it always had. I gave it a shove and stepped inside. The scent was the same, lilac and old wood. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft golden shapes on the living room rug. I wandered slowly through the house. The piano where she taught me Für Elise at age 9. The hallway mirror where she always fixed her earrings. The kitchen table still scratched from years of breakfasts, homework, and hard conversations. In the study I found the old filing cabinet. The bottom drawer held photo albums. Thick leather books filled with glossy prints and fading Polaroids. I sat cross-legged on the rug and flipped through them, letting myself remember. One album was labeled, Danielle, College Years. She'd saved everything. My first dorm room picture, the program from my graduation, even a blurry shot of me presenting at a student conference. Tucked between the pages was a note in her handwriting. She did it all on her own. But I'll still always be her biggest cheerleader. I cried. But this time the tears weren't bitter. They were soft. Healing. I stayed at the house late into the night, cleaning, sorting, letting the memories settle around me like dust in a quiet room. By the time I left, the place felt a little more mine. And a lot more hers. When I got home I had a voicemail. From Mr. Halpern. "Danielle, just a heads up. Mark's lawyer filed a formal challenge to the will this afternoon. They're claiming undue influence and diminished mental capacity. I'll handle it, but we might need to prepare for a deposition if it goes further." I wasn't surprised. Mark had always believed pressure could bend the truth. But what he didn't understand was, truth doesn't break that easily. I called Halpern the next morning. "Let him file whatever he wants," I said. "Mom made her decision. We're just honoring it." Still, the idea of a deposition made my stomach twist. I wasn't afraid of telling the truth. I just hated the idea of airing our family dysfunction like laundry in court. But I would do it if I had to. For Mom. For myself. A week later, Halpern called again. "I've got some news," he said. Mark's lawyer withdrew the challenge. I blinked. "What? Why?" Halpern chuckled. "Apparently, after reviewing your mother's medical records, journal entries, and the video testimony, they realized they didn't have a case." I was stunned. "So that's it." "That's it," he confirmed. "He's still bitter. But he's not stupid enough to lose in public." I exhaled finally, fully. It was over. Not just the legal part, but the battle. The narrative. The years of being overlooked, underestimated, pushed aside by someone who always thought his name carried more weight than mine. Now it was clear. Mom had seen everything. And she made sure her final word was loud enough to silence even Mark. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from Sandra. "Danielle. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. I let Mark control the narrative for too long. You deserved better from both of us." I folded the letter, stunned. Maybe people could surprise you after all. That evening, I went back to Mom's house again. This time I brought flowers. I placed them on the mantel, lit a candle, and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." The house was quiet, but I swear I felt her in the room. Not as a ghost, but as something stronger. A presence. A memory. A mother's love, finally fully received. It had been nearly a month since the will reading, and I'd finally begun to exhale. No more lawyer calls. No more threats from Mark. No more biting my nails every time the phone buzzed. I was still living in my small apartment, but I'd started spending more time at Mom's house. My house now. Cleaning, sorting, remembering. It was strange how grief shifted. Some days it punched you in the chest. Other days, it wrapped itself around you like a blanket you didn't ask for but couldn't shake. Then came the knock on the door. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through a shoebox of old receipts and faded birthday cards, when I heard it, 3 hard knocks. Not tentative. Not neighborly. The kind of knock that carries entitlement. I opened the door. It was Mark. His hair was more unkempt than usual. His eyes red-rimmed. He held a manila envelope in one hand and a takeout coffee in the other. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice flat. I said nothing. Just stepped aside and let him pass. He walked in like he owned the place. Like nothing had changed. And for a second that familiar resentment flared in me. The way he always assumed space belonged to him, that people would make room. He placed the coffee on the table and dropped the envelope next to it. "What's this?" I asked. He didn't sit. Just stood awkwardly near the table. "That's everything," he said. "Everything Mom left me before she rewrote the will." I stared at the envelope. "Why are you giving it to me?" Mark let out a sharp breath, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. "Because I'm tired, Danielle. Tired of fighting. Tired of pretending like I didn't screw this up." I blinked. "Wait. Are you apologizing?" He winced. "Don't make it weird." I couldn't help but smirk. Bit late for that. He rolled his eyes, but it was the first moment of something real between us in years. A moment not drenched in sarcasm or superiority. He finally sat. "I've been thinking about what you said. About Mom seeing through us both. And you're right. She did." He stared at the kitchen counter. The same place he used to sneak beers during high school, the same spot where Mom had once caught him and grounded him for a month. "I thought I was the favorite," he continued. "I thought that meant I'd always be protected. That she'd never turn on me." "She didn't turn on you," I said quietly. "She just told the truth. Finally." Mark swallowed hard. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. I didn't know about the journals. About what she wrote. I tilted my head. "Did someone show you?" He nodded. "Sandra. After the will challenge failed, she went to Halpern and asked if she could read some of Mom's personal records. I didn't even know she did it until she came home in tears. That stunned me." Sandra cried. Mark gave a humorless laugh. "Yeah. First time I've seen her cry over something that wasn't designer shoes or a lost Instagram sponsorship." We both laughed, softly, cautiously, like people testing the limits of peace. "She said," Mark continued, "that Mom loved you in a way that made her proud. Not because you were perfect, but because you were kind. Because you showed up. Even when it was hard." I felt something tight in my chest unwind. "She said I made everything about myself," Mark added. And she's right. He leaned forward. I know I can't undo what I said. Or the way I acted after the will reading. But I need you to know. I never hated you, Danielle. I just didn't know how to be second best. The words hung between us like smoke. I didn't speak right away. What could I say? I'd spent years assuming Mark would never reflect, never admit fault. And now here he was, raw, awkward, but undeniably trying. I don't need you to grovel, I said finally. But I do need honesty. Mark nodded. I can do that. He gestured to the envelope. Inside's a letter Mom wrote to me. A personal one. She gave it to me the week before she changed the will. Told me to read it if things ever got complicated. I didn't open it until yesterday. He paused. She said, she hoped I'd grow up someday. That I'd stop thinking inheritance was something you earned through charm or proximity. She said love wasn't a prize to be won, it was something you had to practice. He looked up at me, eyes shining. I didn't practice love, Danielle. I practiced control. That's what I learned from Dad. That's what I thought strength was. But she saw through it. I felt tears pricking my eyes again. She also said, he added, that if I ever had the guts to come clean, you might forgive me. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I reached across the table and picked up the envelope. Slid it into the drawer without opening it. She was right, I said softly. We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable silence. Just quiet. Like a storm had passed and we were still waiting to see what survived. Eventually Mark stood. I won't bother you again, he said. I needed to say that. Out loud. I nodded. He reached the door, paused. Oh, before I forget, he added, I talked to Halpern. Asked him if we could take Mom's journals and make some kind of memoir. Publish it. For the family. I raised an eyebrow. You want to publish Mom's journals? Not all of them, he said quickly. Just the parts that tell her story. Her perspective. You'd be the co-author, obviously. I didn't respond right away. I was still trying to wrap my head around the idea. You don't have to decide now, he said. Just think about it. And with that he left. The house felt still again. But not empty. I sat back at the table, heart full of too many emotions to name. Then slowly I pulled out the envelope. Not the one with the old legal documents. The other one. The one Mark had just handed me. Mom's final letter to him. I didn't open it. It wasn't mine to read. But knowing it had changed him even a little, was enough for now. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new. Not reconciliation. Not yet. But truth. And for the first time in a long time that felt like more than enough. I didn't hear from Mark for 2 weeks after that. No texts. No calls. No sudden drop-ins. And honestly, I appreciated the space. There's a weird kind of quiet that comes after emotional upheaval. Like your brain can't decide whether to grieve, rest, or start rebuilding. I spent those days at Mom's house mostly alone, slowly turning it from a museum of memory into something livable. I boxed up her clothes. Donated her furniture, except for the reading chair she loved by the bay window. That I kept. One afternoon as I was reorganizing a stack of photo albums, I found a note tucked behind a framed photo of us from a Thanksgiving in 2010. It was in Mom's handwriting. Danielle. If you ever truly move back in, this house will need less of me and more of you. Don't preserve me. Replace me. Make it yours. That's how I'll live on. Love, Mom. I cried again. That kind of cry that sneaks up on you. Quiet. Not from sadness but from something softer. Love. Permission. Closure. By the end of the week, I'd ordered a new couch, started repainting the kitchen cabinets, and called a contractor to look at turning the garage into a creative studio. I also started journaling. Not just about grief or Mark, but about everything. My childhood, my fears, what it felt like to be invisible in your own family for so long, and then suddenly painfully seen. That's when I started considering the memoir idea. Mark's suggestion had felt laughable at first. Why would we work together on something so personal? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Not just because of Mom's story, but because of our story. How broken people inherited broken love, and somehow had to rebuild from scratch. So I texted him. I'm in. Let's write it. But I set the tone. No sugarcoating. His reply came a few hours later. Agreed. Full truth. Even the ugly parts. And just like that we started. Every Sunday afternoon we met at a neutral spot, a cafe halfway between our apartments. I brought a notebook. He brought his laptop. We'd read through excerpts of Mom's journals together, then share memories and impressions from those same periods. The process wasn't always easy. Some days Mark got defensive. Other days I snapped too fast. But there was something powerful about sitting across from each other with Mom's words between us, like she was guiding the conversation, still parenting us from beyond. One entry we found was dated 6 months before her stroke. Mark always wants to be right. Danielle always wants to be understood. But neither is listening to the other. Maybe one day they'll both realize they're more alike than they think. We stared at it for a long time. Mark was the one to speak first. She really did know us better than we knew ourselves. We both nodded. That afternoon we outlined the first 3 chapters. Mark even suggested calling it The Will and the Way. Part play on the inheritance drama, part nod to the emotional journey we were unpacking. I didn't hate it. We kept writing. Weeks turned into months. Fall arrived. I watched the leaves change outside Mom's bay window and wondered what she would have thought about all this. About Mark and me finally finding common ground through words, not war. By October we had a rough draft of 8 chapters. We sent them to a publishing consultant I knew from a nonfiction workshop I'd taken years ago. She read it in 3 days and called me in tears. "This isn't just a memoir," she said. "It's a guide for families who never learned how to speak to each other." She offered to connect us with a literary agent. Mark and I celebrated over greasy burgers and milkshakes, something we hadn't done since we were teenagers. It felt oddly normal. And then came the twist. Not from Mark. Not from a hidden clause or a lawyer. But from our father. Mark's biological dad, Richard. The man who walked out on their family when Mark was 12 and hadn't spoken to him since. The man Mom never forgave. The man I had met only twice and barely remembered. Mark got a call. "Richard's dying," he said, voice strangely calm. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He wants to see me." I froze. "What are you going to do?" Mark stared at his untouched coffee. "I don't know. Part of me wants to scream at him. Another part, I don't know. It's weird. Writing this book has cracked something open in me." He met my eyes. "Would you come with me?" I blinked. "Seriously?" "Yeah. You're the only one who understands how complicated this stuff is. I don't trust myself to go alone." We flew to Phoenix the next week. Richard was in a hospice facility. Thin, pale, but somehow still commanding. When he saw Mark, he didn't cry. He just said, "You look like your mother." Mark sat beside him. I stood in the corner, quietly observing. They talked for an hour. About nothing and everything. Regret. Time. Lost chances. And then Richard turned to me. "You were always the quiet one." I nodded. "She loved you," he said. "Even when she was angry. She told me once that if she had to bet on either of you to survive life's messes, it'd be you." I didn't know what to say to that. We left Phoenix the next morning. On the flight home, Mark was silent. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something. A new chapter. Titled, "The Fathers We Had, and the Ones We Needed." I didn't read it until days later. When I did, I cried. Not because it was about Richard, but because it was the first time Mark truly wrote about Mom. Not as a possession, not as a prize, but as a person. Complex. Flawed. Loving. The kind of writing that tells the truth without asking for applause. By the time winter came, we had a full manuscript. We titled it, "The Will and the Way," a true story about inheritance, identity, and becoming better than we were taught. A publisher picked it up in February. The book releases next fall. And for the first time in my life, I'm not dreading the future. I'm curious about it. Grief doesn't vanish. Neither do scars. But I'm learning that healing doesn't mean pretending the past was different. It means building something stronger in its place. Sometimes with the most unlikely people. Sometimes, even with the brother who once laughed when you got a symbolic $100. Turns out Mom left us more than money. She left us the blueprint to rebuild. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who once got laughed out of a will reading was now co-authoring a national bestseller. The Will and the Way hadn't even hit shelves yet, but pre-orders were climbing, and the publishing team was already arranging interviews, podcasts, even a feature in a popular Sunday magazine. Mark and I were, well, cordial was putting it mildly. We had become friends, Not in the sticky sweet, overly sentimental way, but in the real, earned-through-fire way. We bickered during editing. We disagreed about tone. But somehow we'd gotten good at knowing when to speak and when to back off. We'd also become, to our own surprise, each other's first readers. "I still think Chapter 6 needs a stronger closer," he texted one night at 11:32 p.m. I replied with a gif of a man diving off a cliff into a puddle. "That's your idea of a stronger ending?" But we both rewrote it anyway. And it worked. In the months leading up to the launch, the buzz around the book began to reach people we hadn't expected. Like Sandra. Yes, that's Sandra, Mark's ex-wife. They'd divorced quietly a year earlier and I'd only heard rumors. Something about resentment, money tension, and 1,000 unspoken words piling up until they exploded. I didn't pry. Mark was closed off about it, until one afternoon in March. We were sitting in a Barnes & Noble cafe, signing copies for early distribution. "She messaged me," he said, flipping to a blank title page. "Said she saw our interview on that podcast. Said I didn't sound like the man she was married to." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that good or bad?" He looked up, a little lost. "I think it's complicated. She want to talk?" He nodded. "Coffee. Next week." I didn't press. But I knew what that kind of message meant. Not a rekindling but a curiosity. A checking in with a man she'd buried emotionally. One she didn't recognize anymore and maybe for the first time wanted to. That's the thing about growth. When you start telling the truth, really telling it, people feel it. And they start wondering if maybe they need to revisit their own stories too. Meanwhile, I had my own ghosts visiting. 3 weeks before the book's release, I received an unexpected voicemail. "Hi Danielle. It's Ellen. From the hospice team. I know this is out of the blue, but I thought you might want to know. Pamela had a friend who asked us to reach out to you when the time was right. She left something behind. Something she wanted you to have in person." Ellen. I remembered her. She'd been Mom's favorite nurse. Kind, sharp, always humming when she worked. I called her back immediately. "What did she leave?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She called it her unofficial letter. It wasn't for the lawyer. It was just for you. I agreed to meet her the next day. Ellen arrived at the same cafe Mark and I frequented, holding a sealed manila envelope. No address. Just my name and Mom's handwriting. "She asked me not to mail it," Ellen said gently. "She said the weight of it needed to be felt, not just read." I thanked her, paid for her coffee and drove straight to the house. I sat by the bay window, Mom's chair still warm from the afternoon sun, and opened it. There were only a few pages. No formal greeting. No, "Dear Danielle." Just her voice, exactly how I remembered it. You're probably wondering why I made the will so dramatic. Why I allowed Mark to gloat even for a second. Why I didn't just make it all clear from the start. But here's the thing, sweetheart. Sometimes the truth only lands when it crashes. I knew what Mark expected of me. I knew what you feared. And I knew that if I made things neat and clean, nothing would change. You'd each stay locked in your stories of being the forgotten one, the angry one, the overlooked daughter, the favored son. I couldn't untangle all that in life. But I could at least force a reckoning in death. I always hoped you two would learn how to speak to each other without using me as the middleman. Or the referee. Or the scoreboard. You don't owe me anything, Danielle. Not forgiveness, not understanding. But I hope you see now that I saw you, really saw you. Even when I didn't say it right. Even when I didn't say it enough. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just written in the margins. And sometimes it's hidden in the last clause. Mom. I cried again. This time not out of grief but out of something else. Relief. Mom knew exactly what she was doing. She hadn't lost her way in her final years. She'd simply chosen a different kind of clarity. One that didn't come with easy answers but left space for growth. I called Mark. "Come over," I said. An hour later we sat side by side on the couch. I handed him the letter. He read it silently, then wiped his eyes. "She always knew how to land the final punch, huh?" he said with a sad smile. "She didn't punch. She pushed," I corrected. "And we're finally moving." That night we outlined the final chapter of the book. A chapter we hadn't planned. One that tied everything together. Not just the inheritance or the reveal but the aftermath. The healing. The quiet forgiveness that sneaks up on you in everyday moments. A few weeks later the book launched. We did interviews. Podcasts. even a live Q&A with readers. And something strange happened. People began emailing us. Not just fans but strangers. Mothers. Siblings. Estranged relatives who'd read our story and seen themselves in it. "I haven't spoken to my brother in 11 years, one message read. "I sent him your book." He replied, "We're meeting next month." Another one said, "This book made me understand my daughter for the first time. Thank you." Mark and I looked at each other after that first wave of emails and just sat in stunned silence. We hadn't just written a memoir. We'd started a conversation. One morning, while walking through Mom's favorite garden near the lake, I found a small bronze plaque I'd never noticed before. It was weathered but clear. "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." Mark caught up to me, hands in his pockets. "Think she knew we'd make it here?" he asked, glancing at the plaque. I nodded. She didn't write this ending. But she planted it. The book tour ended in late autumn. We'd traveled to 10 cities, spoken at libraries, universities, and even military bases. The demand surprised everyone, including us. Turns out, stories about family, forgiveness, and secrets wrapped in last wills have a universal pull. But after months of hotels, interviews, and polite small talk with strangers holding Sharpies and copies of the will in the way, I was ready to breathe. Back in Mom's house, which was now legally my house, I made a decision. I opened the back porch, restained the wood, replaced the old wicker chairs, and turned it into something she would have loved. A space for deep conversations, good coffee, and maybe a little truth. Mark dropped by a week later, unannounced, holding 2 cups of coffee and a rolled-up poster under one arm. "What's that?" I asked, eyeing the poster. He smirked and handed it over. "For your office." I unrolled it. It was the front page of the New York Times, framed in soft glass. The headline read, "Estranged siblings write the will that healed them." I stared at it. "That's bold," I murmured. "You didn't read the subtitle," he said, grinning. "Pamela Brooks' legacy stretches beyond inheritance, into reconciliation." That got me. I had to look away to swallow the lump in my throat. "Thanks," I whispered. Thought it deserved a place next to Mom's garden chair. We sat outside for hours that day, watching squirrels dart across the yard, trading stories we hadn't told in years. Not just about Mom, about childhood. About the strange summers we spent tolerating each other. About the petty fights. The shared desserts. The unspoken jealousy. And how, despite it all, we'd ended up here. Not just as co-authors but as siblings again. That weekend I hosted a dinner. It wasn't fancy: roasted chicken, wine, a salad I barely chopped right, but it was ours. Just a few close friends, Mark, his girlfriend Natalie, yes, new and very much not Sandra, and my old college roommate who had just moved back to town. After dinner we lit a fire in the backyard and passed around blankets. Someone brought up the book and I expected the usual polite praise. Instead, Natalie turned to me. "Do you ever think about what she would have said? About the book, I mean?" I blinked. "All the time. But I'd never said that aloud." "She'd say we finally figured it out," I said softly. "That we stopped living like characters in her story. That we started writing our own." Mark nodded slowly. "She'd say we were dramatic," he added. "But secretly proud." I got a laugh. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stood alone in the kitchen rinsing wine glasses. There, tucked between the cabinet and the backsplash, was a tiny photo I hadn't noticed before. It was old, grainy, but unmistakable. Mom sitting on the porch with us as kids. Mark, arms crossed in teenage defiance. Me wearing giant glasses and clutching a notebook. Mom's smile wasn't wide, but it was deep. The kind of smile that only comes when you know something no one else does. I stared at it for a long time. Then I left it there. Right where she'd hidden it. Some truths don't need framing. They just need to be. The months rolled by. The book remained steady on bestseller lists. Eventually, the attention quieted, the interviews slowed. Life returned to its normal rhythm, or whatever passed for normal after you'd published your family secrets. One morning, I received an invitation in the mail. Heavy cream envelope. No return address. Inside was a single card. Engraved. Annual Estate Law Conference. Keynote guest, Danielle Brooks. I laughed out loud. Apparently, telling the truth about a will had made me some kind of celebrity in legal circles. I showed the invite to Mark. "You going?" he asked. "Only if you come with me." He raised an eyebrow. "You want us to keynote together?" We're a package deal, I said, grinning. The speech we gave at that conference was different from our previous talks. Less about the drama, more about the consequences. More about how wills don't just distribute assets. They uncover legacy, personality, truths we're not always ready to face. Afterward, an older woman approached us in the lobby. I'm an estate attorney, she said, pressing a worn envelope into my hand. But I'm also a mother. And your story made me rewrite everything last night. I opened the envelope later. It was a copy of her will. With a new clause. She'd written a letter to her 2 sons. Not about money. About her. Her values. Her regrets. Her love. Sometimes the impact of your truth isn't immediate. But it ripples. A year later, Mark and I stood at the edge of the lake. Same spot where we once argued over dock rights and who got the bigger bedroom during summers. The house had long since sold. We agreed to let it go, neither of us needing it anymore. But the lake remained. Mark skipped a stone. It bounced once, twice, sunk. Terrible, I teased. Like you could do better. I picked up a flat one, flicked my wrist, and watched it leap 5 times before it vanished. Show off. We sat on a bench nearby, the lake quiet around us. You ever think about writing another book? I asked. Mark shrugged. Only if I get to roast you again. I nudged his shoulder. Then he added, but seriously, maybe. But it'd have to be real. Like this one. We watched the water for a while. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A necklace. Gold. Simple. With a tiny charm shaped like an envelope. She would have wanted you to have this, he said. I recognized it immediately. Mom's. She used to wear it on hard days. Said it reminded her that every problem has a letter waiting to be opened. I clasped it around my neck. It felt right. Like closure. Like beginning. I don't know if stories ever really end. But I do know this. Some of the most powerful ones don't scream. They whisper. They sit in sealed letters. In garden benches. In awkward silences that finally break open into truth. Mom's will didn't change my life because of what it gave me. It changed everything because of what it revealed. That love isn't always written in clear, bold letters. Sometimes, it hides in the fine print. Waiting to be found. Waiting to be read. And sometimes, waiting to be rewritten.